Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties, Season 1, Episode 7. Today we have joining us from Sydney, Austen and Lara, and joining me from Canberra here is Kieran. I am your host today, Vikas, and we've got lots of stuff to talk about, I guess, starting with, well, basically the thing that got Andrew Bolt done, 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. So obviously everyone is quite familiar with this topic and how it's been portrayed in the news, but I thought we'd get a little bit of a perspective here from our panelists.
So I'd leap in here with just an initial statement, which I think it's a very stereotyped statement, and it probably reflects, dare I say, a position of privilege. But I'm bored of the story.
Great white man born in the country is in a position of privilege.
I know. For those viewing at home, or listening rather, my whiteness may have been hidden from you. I am indeed pretty white. And
that's why it's
I self-identify as plaid.
ethnicity later, but right now we're talking about the Racial Discrimination Act.
Yeah, well, look,
so I think Waleed Ali broke some ground there, though, last week. It's okay to stereotype white people in the national press. So I feel that it's probably okay for me to stereotype myself as a white person in the internet. But what I was going to say is that it probably reflects a bit of sort of news story fatigue and all of that. But I'm bored of the story. I'm over it. I'm just like, do whatever with the Racial Discrimination Act. I've read too many op-eds about this. I would like something else now. I don't know whether this is...
In the condition it's in at the moment, it's a pretty minor change anyway. And whereas originally it was... I can't remember whether it was getting rid of 18C entirely or whether it was just humiliate, offend that they were going to get rid of, whereas now they're being replaced by vilify and intimidate. So I actually think it's being beefed up, which is interesting.
well, actually, it's actually nullifying it slightly, because Brandis wants to add that it's okay to comment in a whole host of spaces. So if it's relevant to political discussion, if it's in the context of religion, culture, etc., etc., etc. In which case, basically, it does quite weaken the law in the sense that we can all argue that we're just opining, giving our opinion. But I'm going to get a little bit heavy on this topic in the sense that, look, the main what Kieran said there about, he's just over it, and that opinion is reflected quite a lot in basically normal people around Australia. And the reason why Brandis has sort of backed down from his position that I'm going to get rid of 18C, and 18C is a horrible section in that act, it essentially criminalises thought crime. Basically, he's backed away because the Liberal Party has recognised that if they go ahead with this, they only have the support of a very, very, very small group of people inside the Australian public. And, that has a major issue in the sense that, just like with work choices, the Liberal Party could go ahead and institute something that may speak to their ideological base, but not win the battle for hearts and minds, and as a result, end them with a severe loss of political capital with no real gain in terms of policy initiatives.
This is the biggest revelations for me, is the unpopularity of this policy. I mean, I understand it's easy for opponents to make the claim that, well, you want to take away provisions of the Racial Discrimination Act because you would like to discriminate racially. But I'll go so far as to say upset and a little bit terrified by the extent to which people in this country don't think that free speech is a human right.
Now, I actually object to this idea that racial vilification and free speech are somehow a dichotomy. You can actually be supporting free speech, and you can at the same time say racial vilification is not okay. I think Chris Berg actually put that best when he said, "I don't agree with Andrew Bolt, but I will defend to death his right to publish lies about someone not being an Aboriginal," right? Because that is I think that the reason why it's portrayed as such a minority opinion is because essentially people are standing up to say what Andrew Bolt did was right, and morally speaking, what Andrew Bolt has done is wrong. What he's done is actually get up there on a bully pulpit and basically take the piss out of someone for their heritage, and I don't think that's right, but I don't think that should be illegal at the same time.
And I think that this is one of the things that's been most disturbing to me about the narrative of this debate is that you constantly hear this argument being repeated that if you support something being legal, you are automatically saying that any way in which this is used is morally acceptable and approvable. That unless we have these laws against free speech, we're basically approving of all of the negative speech that anyone could say, which is it's a horrible way to frame morality in the context of the law. Is that something can be horribly distasteful, but ought not to be illegal for very basic reasons of human rights. And the fact that people get accused that the moment you say let's get rid of these provisions because they violate a basic human right of free speech, people assume and unfortunately, the defenders of this act have not done a very good job of framing it otherwise, but people assume that you are approving of the bad speech, when really what you're saying is speech must be fought with more speech. That is the correct weapon to use against that disease.
And that's why Brandes got in the shitter when he said people have a right to be a bigot. And you know what? I agree with him. I agree with that statement that people can be bigoted. And look, from the perspective of someone who probably would be the target of such racial vilification, I don't want to do business with bigots. So essentially, when you're silencing them, you are masking the market signal that would go about and make me take actual market corrective action on this person.
And I think we need to, when I say we, I mean people who support free speech and support changes to the Racial Discrimination Act, need to be making it a lot clearer that the point of this is, as Vikas said, to use the sunlight to identify and drive out the filth. I don't know how I'm supposed to avoid doing business with or avoid being friends with racist people if I don't know they're racist. And the unfortunate thing is, if you ban their ability to express their intolerance, it makes it much harder to find out who these people are.
Yeah, I think probably to disagree a little bit on that point, I don't think that banning their intolerance actually stops them being intolerant. I think that the signal is still there. My problem with these kind of laws is that I don't think that you can effectively legislate morality like this. You can't, yes, perhaps you can stop Andrew Bolt writing an article, but you're not going to affect what Go Public, or what a hypothetical person on the street says to hypothetical other race person on the street. The laws just don't work like that.
Yeah, you're right.
And society doesn't work like that.
They also come into conflict. Like the best example was until I think it would have been the 80s. The Church of Latter-day Saints regarded Black Americans as basically being, was it Canaanites or something, like a lost tribe of Canaanites or some sort of thing that, like people that didn't participate in the glorious battle between heaven and hell, and therefore viewed them as being inferior and worthy of slavery. And that would have been protected under their religious freedom until it was sort of discussed. Sorry, until it sort of changed within their church. And it would have come into conflict with our RDA. But obviously all of this stuff happened, about 30 years ago, so it's not exactly relevant today.
I think the other side of that, Church of Latter-day Saints, and that is a much more of a much bigger presence in America than here. They have a Bill of Rights there that protects people's right to say things which are lies, say things which are racist. You have cases there where you've got the ACLU.
That's covered under the First Amendment.
If you like it, you can keep it.
Yeah. I was going to make the point of the ACLU fighting court cases to defend free speech for the Ku Klux Klan. It's interesting to me what a different culture America has to us with free speech, with regards to free speech. But I think when people sort of talk about repealing RDA or changing RDA as somehow dramatically changing Australia's character, I think that you can look at the US and you can say, well, not actually that big a change.
Yeah, and it's not just that big a change. It's also the aspect of, look, I agree with letting people like Bolt speak, because the mark of free speech in any society is not by what popular speech is protected; it's by what unpopular speech is protected.
Exactly. Free speech that I agree with, not free speech at all. It's a nonsensical term. But I actually think that it's time to move on to different marginalized groups. And I'm talking about the nippled fish of the sea, which are whales.
Yes, the white whales of the ocean. We're going into Moby Dick territory now. So I'm sure by now everybody has heard the International Court of Justice has recently ruled that Japan does not actually conduct whale research in the in the Antarctic seas. Sorry, yeah, that is right, the Antarctic seas. Surprise, surprise. Something we've all known for over 20 years. So there's a couple of issues here. So firstly, the Japanese whaling industry is actually state subsidized. So, I mean,
they must really want those whales.
Well, yeah. I mean, from what I know about the topic, now there was a time when you could have argued that whaling was part of Japan's culture, but the younger kids there nowadays, they don't actually see it that way. From all the stuff that I've seen, the research indicates that the whales are not that popular in Japan anymore.
I actually take offense to that whole method of arguing for whaling, that it's the part of anyone's particular culture, that it's either wrong or it isn't, and it needs to be decided based on the basis of that, not based on the idea that, oh, this culture did it and this culture didn't. That, like human sacrifice is bad. It doesn't matter if it's part of Mayan culture. I wouldn't tolerate any modern-day Mayans performing human sacrifice because the act itself is bad. And I think that that's the real question that ought to be being debated is are we okay with killing whales? Not are we okay with certain people killing whales? It has to be a blatant statement of morality if we want to make any real decisions about this.
It's a pretty good question. Personally, I'm just about as okay with killing whales as I am with any other thing. I think for a lot of people, the reason that whaling seems like such a horrific thing is that they're big and they're mammals and they're pretty and you hear about them in school and on TV and they're interesting and people give them a lot of sort of consideration and affection, or mental affection anyway, that they don't give to chickens, cows, animals that we would eat in other parts of the world or in the West. So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy going on here with the investment of emotional energy in this.
But isn't that the cultural argument? I mean, I'm a cultural Hindu, and quite frankly, I should be much more offended about you guys eating beef than I am. But you
part of our culture, Vikas.
Doesn't mean that there isn't a cultural institution that people would be offended by that. But again, the question is not, is it right for this culture and and wrong for another culture? The question is it wrong in and of itself? Is it Malaman say? And I think that's the question we need to be asking about whales. And so now I'm this is not consistent with a lot of my other positions, but I'm actually fairly okay with granting higher intelligence animals a limited form of human rights, or rational rights, as I call them. I think that the whole notion of human rights is highly anthropocentric. But you have to have a basis of why do humans have rights? Is it because of our genetic code, or is it because of some attribute that we have? That's, for example, I'll take a skin sample that has my genetic code, but clearly it doesn't have the same rights that I do as a person. And I think that the definition of where rights come from is extremely important to the discussion of what rights animals have, if any.
So
I was gonna go into a huge spiel about what rights actually are, but then I realised that's not actually relevant to this topic. But yeah, you're right. The question of rights is somewhat important, and I don't think animal rights would quite, insofar, protect the whales, in the sense that, well, look, as soon as a whale can sign a contract, you can make them sign all kinds of fun contracts.
So we need to genetically engineer the whales so they have hands. Without entering contractual arrangements.
That fit flippers.
Yeah, no, I think Lara's being sarcastic, but I actually agree. The fact that a whale cannot sign a contract is not sufficient to me to say that it doesn't have any rights. That rights, and this is my definition, and I'm welcoming your alternative definitions that whales wouldn't fall under, but it has to do with some ability of moral intelligence. And if you can come up with a testable hypothesis that goes along with this, that say the ability to commit immoral acts might be a good metric for having moral intelligence. So the fact that, say, dolphins rape each other and murder each other for pleasure, that's an immoral act, I would argue. It doesn't actually advance any the species in any sort of Darwinian way. So if we frame it in that sense, yes, you could say that dolphins have some degree of moral intelligence. And this may be the bad definition of rights, but that's the process we need to take if we're going to have a serious discussion about this. It can't be whales are adorable. That's an insufficient evidence. It can't be whales just aren't humans, so therefore we don't have to care about them. It has to be what are rights and do they apply to whales? And it's really, quite frankly, dishonest to have the debate in any other terms, in my opinion.
See, I would sort of typify that as that whales, and it's a reasonably brutal argument. I would think of it as whales have not asserted their rights.
Okay, yeah.
What about people in comas?
Yeah, that's another example. Look, I tend to view rights in a much more neoclassical way, I guess you could say, in the sense that I believe rights exist in the context of governments. Exist in the context of governance, and the idea of that is like essentially a right is a negative restriction imposed on any sort of government of the individual. So I don't believe it makes very much sense for animals to have rights in the sense that they're not really governed.
Until we find out that there is in fact a whale parliament.
Yeah, and when that happens, we obviously might have to declare war on them.
Well, I mean, Clyde Palmer almost qualifies.
Ouch! Ouch!
I suppose while we're talking about whales, that should be more of a...
And now we interrupt this broadcast for 15 minutes of whale song.
I can actually...
This is the Whale Bill of Rights.
No, I'm willing to accept that I might be wrong on this, but I think that the principle of animals having rights can't just be discounted as absurd per se. It has to be a discussion that people are having. Now, that having been said, I definitely acknowledge that human rights are something we know exists. That I don't think anyone would deny, any reasonable person would say humans have no rights. So if we're going to
I've heard a large number of people say that rights come from the UN, which means once the UN is gone, rights will no longer exist.
So I would probably find myself closer to that kind of thinking than others. I don't think that rights exist innately. I don't think that that's a satisfying intellectual argument. And so for me, I think rights exist only insofar as we agree that they exist. And we might agree that a set of negative liberties are a good way for us to exist and coexist and live our lives, and we might call them rights, but they're a social construct. And I think that arguing for God-given rights, innate rights, intelligence-based rights, any of those other frameworks, it just is avoiding the underlying thing, which is rights are a social construct, and we should have debates about what is and is not a good right. And I'm happy to argue that free speech is a good right, but free education is a bad right. But I'm very skeptical of arguments that try and dress up one type of right as being innate, God-given, etc. I just feel that those are unsatisfying arguments.
All rights are rights, but some rights are more right than others.
Right.
So what?
It's a fine one. It's a common one, and I don't think it's a totally stupid one. It's wrong, but I don't think I think it's a falsehood that many people accept. But within that framework, I think you can also make an argument then for animal rights, that if we, as a humanity, all sort of agree that there are certain animals that we value to the point where we don't want to see them tortured, we don't want to see them killed, we don't want to see them murdered and eaten, then they have as much right as humans that we decide we don't want to see killed, we don't want to see tortured, we don't want to see eaten. That if there's a social basis for rights, then that could apply to animals in a certain social framework. So, I mean, I think all I'm arguing for right now is that that's the debate we should be having. It shouldn't be should Japan be allowed to kill whales? It's should people be allowed to kill whales? And if the answer is yes, then let the slaughter begin, right? Like seriously, if we decide whales don't have whales don't have whites, the white whale has no whites. If we decide this, then open season. But if we decide they don't, then I think it's right to protect them on the same. That word doesn't have any meaning in my brain anymore, right? Sorry, I'm just going to stop.
Okay, well, before we get into recycling arguments, I suggest we... Hey, look at that segue. I suggest we move on to our next topic, which has been tearing up the airwaves today. A council, which as far as I can tell is Mackay Regional Council, which I think is... Oh no, this is private Queensland. Oh, this is an old story. Okay, different one. A council in South Australia has apparently started sending out rubbish inspectors, and their job is to rifle through your bin once it has been put out to be collected and determine whether or not you are recycling in a satisfactory fashion, by which we mean, of course, putting recyclable items in the rubbish bin. And this is fascinating. This has kind of captured a fair few people's imagination, because I would expect a creepy, murdery, stalker ex-boyfriend to engage in the kind of ruffling through my bin behaviour, and not so much my local council.
Criminal government. Criminal government.
It's, yeah.
It's eerie.
It's weird.
It's eerie.
It makes me uncomfortable.
Makes me want to scrub myself.
Yeah, anyway, and the penalty, if you have been found to be recycling incorrectly, is a fine to the value of, I think, $81, was what was cited by the Today Show this morning. So it raises a lot of interesting questions, which, for me, begin with, is recycling mandatory? Who defines that? Can you fine people for failing to dispose of their waste in the correctly defined fashion, or to what extent can you do that?
I thought the Australian method of disposing of glass is to slam in someone's head in King's Cross.
Wow.
No, that's like no. We do the cowie, and that's got nothing to do with waste disposal. Glassing, that's a Perth thing.
Oh, sorry, my mistake. I hope I didn't offend any particular part of regional Australia.
Don't worry, other parts of Australia have indeed got glassings as well, Lara. You can rest assured that across Sydney you can find a comforting embrace of a broken glass in the face. I think in terms of the question of can governments at some level legislate and say you must recycle, I think the answer is obviously yes, they can. Can they enforce that? I think yes, but only by being incredibly creepy and going through your rubbish. I think the question here is, should they legislate that you must recycle? And I really don't think they should.
You realize
I think
brings up an incredibly delightful way to get back at your neighbors you don't like. You just go and put your recycling in their bin, and the next day they get fined. Right? How do you defend it? No, that's not my bottle. I didn't put that there, officer. Like, I want a paternity test.
Interestingly enough, this brings about a whole bunch of issues to me. In the sense that, okay, so for waste collection, clearly you have to take it out onto the easement, right, so that the local government can pick it up. But the question is, why is that still not your property until it's like actually at a tip? That's the real question that confuses me. Because like, yes, I'm throwing it out, but at the same time, it hasn't quite left my premises yet.
Yeah.
Might be an interesting argument there because the bin is technically, I think, owned by the council.
And you
So-
just kind of...
Yeah, so that,
it may become their property when you put it into their bin. The other side here, they're fining you for putting the wrong thing in their bin and trespassing on their bin.
wow.
In libertarian terms.
Well, the next question
But what I wanted to say is that
is it fair...
so just to
Go ahead.
It's also as you said that you could go and put a glass bottle in your neighbour's bin and cost them $81, and then you could do that every week until you got bored, or forever. It highlights how incredibly arbitrary the law is. It's putting these trash inspectors in a role where they can engage in petty corruption at a very petty level, at a garbage bin level, but a level where there's no real, what evidence can there be for or against this charge?
Gender 21.
If I'm a trash inspector, how long until I'm starting to shake you down and take a tenner, save you the $81, or extort money out of you?
Kieran, I must compliment you. You really are starting to think like a public servant.
I reckon it's going to be... They say, you still love me, this is the only way you can live. Like the creepy ex-boyfriends they are.
So I actually...
That's on the fine notice.
I appreciate that just because they're going through your trash and it's eerie and they're finding you and government is bad. But recycling is bad. It's bad for the environment. It really shits me. Now, okay, so the three things we recycle in Australia, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's aluminum, it's paper, and it's glass. Right?
I will actually correct you. It's aluminium.
Okay, we can get into a discussion about the etymology. I will say the man who discovered it and isolated it called it aluminum. Take with that what you will. In any case,
spelled it incorrectly. Apparently.
Let's pretend that if there is anything to recycle of those, it is metal. However, I would just say that we get metal out of the ground. That's how we get it. I don't see why it's so bad that we are then putting it back in the ground at the end of its life cycle. We're not destroying it. We're not atomizing it. It's still fucking there. The other two though are really bad. So this is paper and this is glass. Glass is made of sand. It is melted down sand. That's all it is. This is not a scarce resource. Not in Australia. We are not running low on sand. Like the notion of recycling glass, it's presuming that it is more efficient to collect glass from all of these different point sources and then melt it down and to make new glass than it is to just go get some more sand and melt that down and make new glass. And it's ludicrous. And I can guarantee you, if anyone does a cost-benefit analysis, it would not stand up to that test. Okay. And paper literally grows on trees. The paper industry in developed countries is positive. They plant more trees than they cut down. It's not a good business model to cut down forests, turn it into paper, and then say, oh, well, now we don't have any more paper. These are businessmen who have a very specific and very effective business model. They plant trees, it becomes paper, they plant more trees. The end. And so I don't care for recycling.
I agree.
So I'm actually going to...
What I'd add there is that I think that aluminium it's been a long time since I read these, but the studies on cost effectiveness and cost benefit and environmental benefits, I think that aluminium was the only one which it actually came out in favor of recycling, because bauxite is a lot rarer than trees or sand, and the process of melting down aluminium tins or cans and getting out usable aluminium is a lot easier than the process of smelting bauxite and less polluting. And unlike glass, it's also, melting down glass to make more glass is not that different to melting sand to make glass. There's similar environmental impacts. Aluminium is probably the only thing that's worth recycling, and in the interest of disclosure and potentially opening myself to an $81 fine, I do not recycle. I live in an apartment block, and there is a chute which goes to a rubbish bin, and I put paper and glass down that chute.
Yeah.
I would just like, for the viewers out there, I am about to chug an energy drink, and I'm going to throw this away in my trash. Fuck the state.
I was actually, yeah, so Kieran's actually taken a large section of the stuff that I was going to talk about. So, you know, so being an engineer, life cycle management is like pretty much the bread and butter of what we actually do. And recycling aluminium is one of those things that is like, recycled aluminium is way, way cheaper than actually getting aluminium out of the ground and getting it made for you. Firstly, because, you know, bauxite is rarer, as he's pointed out. And it's not just that, but the price of aluminium now is way higher than it used to be. So
why
higher than paper?
Like aluminum. Why are people buying my old cans from me?
Because you're not, I don't know, because you're just chucking them in the bin, I guess, or you can take them.
You can take them and get 5 cents a can.
Yeah.
In South Australia.
The problem you find there as well is that, as Kieran kind of identified when he talked about how easy it is to just throw things out, the final problem you find with recycling is you have to prepare your goods to be recycled. Like, if you've got a can of soft drink, I think that only the tab is generally recyclable from that because of the ink that's been put into the labeling. If you have a glass bottle, if you have a plastic container, like, you need to have washed all of these things to have gotten any remnants of food or anything else off. You know, if you have like a Coke bottle, you have to take off the label, you have to take off the lid, you have to wash all of these things and put them in the bin separately, and people just don't do that. So by the time it gets to the recycling depot, it has to be sorted again by people who are employed to sort the recycling from the stuff that can actually be recycled.
Yeah. And I also don't know, do these life cycle cost calculations include garbage inspectors? Because that's a cost. That has an environmental impact. That's part of the impact.
If they're finding $81 a pop, they're probably a net revenue source for local government.
I'd say so.
Which is the other side. It's local government lining their own pockets. The environmental aspect is, let's say, marginal at best. It's them finding a new revenue source.
That's not to say that recycling as a general
probably
concept.
give everyone an $81 fine.
Yeah, that's not to say that recycling as a general concept isn't a bad idea. It's just it's just uneconomical in certain circumstances. But having said that, though, you're actually marginalizing the actual cost of waste, in the sense that, you know, dumping things actually has an implicit cost attached to it, and the cost is largely hidden by the fact that, you know, because governments take care of it, you know, it's taken care of by tax money from other people. The reality is, like, if people were paying the actual true cost of dumping things, recycling would probably be a lot more popular with a lot of things, particularly big and bulky things. Land space, land cost, you know what I'm talking about.
There's a question there. It's around how local government recovers their costs, and they charge you rates, and rates are meant to cover, you know, their cost of disposing of your rubbish, etc. You know, maybe there's an argument there that if you can pay slightly lower rates if everyone recycles and the government comes out and the local government comes out ahead, but I've just not seen that argument being made.
It's not being made because largely local governments aren't. So this sort of comes back to a taxation issue that's been prevalent in the Australian system for a while, the vertical fiscal imbalance. The rates that most local governments charge us do not cover their services. Basically, they go cap in hand to the states go cap in hand to the federal government. It's sort of, our money goes to the very top and sort of trickles back down. Now, as a result of that, like, we don't actually pay the true cost of a lot of things at local level. That's been stated by several pieces of research on this topic.
Yeah, but the fact that there's distortions in the market doesn't justify more distortions in the market to fix the old distortions.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Wrongs don't make it right.
I'm not arguing. Let me be perfectly clear, to borrow a line from Obama there. I am not arguing that this tax is a good thing. Well, yeah, it's not really labeled as a tax, but it's a tax. It's not an optimal outcome.
Let me be perfectly clear. Sorry, I just really wanted to try that.
Yeah, I realized that after I said that. I'm just like, wow, I just pulled an Obama.
Look, you haven't killed anyone with drone that we know of, so...
Yeah, the constant fear.
And that's our show for now. We've had a lot of fun, taken a lot of liberties. If you've enjoyed this show, you'll be happy to know that we are looking at expanding our time slot and having a Q&A session, which we will be calling Am I Being Detained? Stay tuned to hear more about this in the upcoming weeks on our Facebook page.